Joining us now is our panel, Cygnal Principal and Pollster Alex Tarascio and CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI and political strategist Brendan Steinhauser. Thank you both for joining us. Let's start with the polling in the United States, and it's not good news for the Democrats. According to the latest Economist YouGov poll, only 29% of Americans have a very or somewhat favourable view of Democrats in Congress. Views on congressional Democrats have been getting worse and worse since the election last year. Now, this same poll found that Trump's support from independent voters has dropped, but among Republicans, Trump's net approval is still positive with 72 percentage points. Alex, what should we be making of the numbers here? What's your assessment?
So Trump still has very strong approval with Republicans, 72% in that poll. That's actually a little bit on the low side for what you should expect to be getting from your own party. And some of
Okay.
that is because the messiness around immigration raids. I think some of that is because of what we see in the economy. Just generally, people are feeling that the US economy is getting a little bit better, but they aren't necessarily feeling that in their own lives yet. We saw that in our January survey that when it comes to your personal economic situation, people felt that it was getting slightly worse relative to when we asked that same question back in August. But when we do the same thing about the US economy, people do feel like it's getting slightly better compared to back in August. No matter what else is going on in the world, the economy really dominates how people feel, and particularly their own personal economy. And it's kind of a weird situation right now. And so that's why I think his numbers are ticking up, but they still have a long way to go, particularly with independents.
Okay, and we are going to circle back to the economy, but Brendan, I want to get your thoughts. What you make of the polling, and do you think it's consistent with what you're seeing on the ground?
It is. And look, I think for a long time, congressional Democrats, congressional Republicans have had pretty poor numbers overall. The approval rating of Congress has been very low for a long time. But somebody has to win the election. And so voters have to choose between the parties that they dislike the least, I guess, in the moment. I think the president's numbers are a little lower than where he'd like them to be.
Hmm.
But look, he's also someone who's been in politics and has served and run multiple campaigns for president, winning twice, losing one. And so he's been in this arena. Those numbers aren't going to shift a whole lot, I don't think. But I do agree. I think that the economy is weighing on things. And yes, the images coming out of Minneapolis and all of the things going on with the border and immigration are definitely playing into the zeitgeist of the moment.
Let's talk about Minneapolis. As we know, Tom Homan has been sent there. We're hoping that it could be a potential reset. But we've also been hearing from Tim Walz. I mean, he's been comparing what ICE agents are doing to Nazi Germany, and he's absolutely playing politics. This is what he had to say yesterday. Okay, we don't have that grab, unfortunately, but it was seemed a little bit violent towards JD Vance. Alex, can I get your thoughts on Tim Walz? I know he's now going to be working with Donald Trump to kind of fix the situation in Minnesota, but in the lead up throughout all of January, I mean, his rhetoric has been pretty damaging.
It absolutely has. I mean, I'm here as a pollster, but I'm also an American, and the way that he is talking is incredibly irresponsible. And he is making comparisons that are actively radicalizing people, that are pushing people to get into the streets. And at the same time, he has stepped aside in his own ambitions to run for a third term for governor. He announced that he was not going to. He seems to be unburdened by what has been, and he is going out there and saying whatever is in his heart. I can only assume. I think it's really bad for the country. It's not even good for his politics because he doesn't have any reason to have good politics anymore. And so I can only assume that this is what he truly believes in. But I don't think it'll help him. I don't think it'll help the Democratic Party because that kind of really it's political extremism is what turns off independents. It turns off most Republicans, most Democrats, all but the most extreme edges of the fringes.
I think you're being very generous there, saying that this is something he truly believes. I think he's saying it intentionally. He's just got so much Trump derangement syndrome that he'll go so far to compare ICE agents doing their job to Nazis. Brendan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the governor is enjoying the moment, the sort of theater of things. He is on his way out. But look, I think they've got to turn down the temperature here. They've got to take a minute, take a deep breath. We've got to get things under control. The thing that matters the most is this public safety of the citizens of this country, and that does include not only keeping people safe on the streets, there in Minneapolis, but also, the federal government being able to enforce the laws on the books. The voters did put this president in office to enforce those laws. It is one thing to protest peacefully and to film cops, which I think they have every right to do. But it's certainly another thing to, try and obstruct and visit violence upon officers. And obviously, too, we've seen some of the ICE officers use excessive force. I think anybody watching can see that as well. We have to put an end to that. We have to get peace back in our streets, and we have to just enforce the law. That's what the majority of Americans voted for. That's what the majority of independents and all Americans want, is enforce the law. Let the federal government do the job it's meant to do. And there is certainly some responsibility clearly on the side of the administration to make sure they're doing so in a way that respects constitutional rights. And so it's a very fraught situation. And I think the governor and the mayor there and the president all need to get together and just sort of take things down a notch.
I believe we do actually have that grab of Tim Walz. Let's just play it now.
I would beat the out of him now if I could, and I would call that out. I mean, that's just different. In verbally going at it, my argument is much better. In making the case that housing prices are up because of immigration and that we should build on federal lands, it was such a crazy thing. But then when I watched him, I got sucked into that. And if you remember, this was right in that moment of eating dogs and cats. I took that bait and thought that that was the argument of how outrageous it was. That was not the argument.
I mean, he thinks he can beat the S out of J.D. Vance. Tim Walz is such a joke. He was really exposed earlier this year with Nick Shirley's YouTube video going to all the daycare centres and exposing how widespread the fraud was. I mean, look what Tim Walz overseeing. He's meant to be overseeing his state while fraud was just out of control. I want to move on to the economy. Donald Trump has, of course, been selling the message of economic success. And let's just look at this economist, Stephen Moore, shocking CNN explaining that the economy is actually doing well.
Look at the facts of the economy. It is a booming economy. The latest report is almost 5.5% growth in the fourth quarter, which is an incredible number. We haven't seen that in recent memory. We've got gas prices down. Inflation is headed down to the 2% target. Median family income last year was up $2,500. Those are people in the exact middle, adjusted for inflation. I mean, I could go on and on with the positive elements.
Alex, I don't know who would be more shocked, the panelists on CNN or their audience?
It takes a while for economic indicators to become reality in people's lives. I do think that it is starting to happen. A 5.5% growth rate is huge. That's enormous, but it is still a number. That's a number like when the stock market goes up. And so do people feel that in the price of the goods that they buy every day going down? Mostly no. And that's why the political numbers for the president and for the Republican Party are getting a little bit better, but they are not recovering to the point where they would like them to. The same thing you can see with the tariff revenue numbers. When you see real dollars and cents coming in from Trump tariffs, then it goes from being an intellectual argument to something that can actually help bring down the deficit. People feel that more, but it is still ultimately a faraway number in a faraway place that doesn't really affect their lives. It's a good thing, but is it going to change the way people vote? Not yet.
Well, the president has declared that he's jump-starting the American dream. Today, he's been launching Trump Account, which aims to build long-term financial security for millions of children by creating tax-advantaged investment accounts. Here is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent explaining how this is going to help children get a kickstart on their finances.
The compound growth from Treasury's initial seed funding alone stands to make young Americans wealthy. Assuming historical growth rates continue, a single $1,000 deposit into a Trump account at birth should grow to an estimated amount of at least $500,000 by the age of retirement. The $1,000 seed from Treasury is exclusive to newborns. But keep in mind that any American below the age of 18 is also eligible to receive a tax-advantaged Trump account to begin saving for the future. Philanthropists, family, friends, employers, and states.
Brendan, what are your thoughts on this initiative?
I actually really like it. I think that we used to talk in this country about an ownership society and about getting more people to be able to invest in their future, invest in the market. I think it was Albert Einstein that called compound interest the most powerful force in the universe, and there's something to that. So I think it's a good policy. I think we need to continue to do things like cut taxes. We need to get spending under control. And then again, one thing we alluded to earlier was how great the economic growth has been, and those are some extremely good numbers, historic numbers, really, in terms of GDP. But I do want to get ahead of some other potential problems. I work on AI policy, for example, and the AI revolution is coming. So I'd love to see the president get with Congress and work on ways to make sure that we avoid things like massive layoffs or unemployment due to that revolution that's coming soon. But I think if anybody can do it, this president can. I think he and his team understand the economy just about better than any administration we've had in the last 100 years.
Well, activist and rapper Nicki Minaj made a surprise appearance at the US Treasury's Trump Accounts Summit, declaring that she is actually the president's #1 fan, and the anti-Trump groups only make her more MAGA. Listen to this.
Well, I don't know what to say, but I will say that I am probably the president's #1 fan. And that's not going to change. And the hate or what people have to say, it does not affect me at all. It actually motivates me to support him more. And it's going to motivate all of us to support him more. We're not going to let them get away with bullying him and, the smear campaigns. It's not going to work. Okay? He has a lot of force behind him, and God is protecting him. Amen. Okay.
Alex, it's interesting listening to that point there. Obviously, she claims she's Trump's #1 fan. I think a lot of people would be fighting for that title. But I think she makes a good point that the more kind of anti-Trump hate that is out there, that is targeting Donald Trump, I think it only boosts his support. I know we were speaking about the polling numbers earlier in the show, and it's not probably exactly where he would like them to be. But I think Nicki Minaj makes an interesting and probably true point there.
I think she does. His numbers are going up, certainly since November. That was a low. The government shutdown was a pretty negative time for his numbers, for Republicans' numbers. They've been rebounding since then and have continued to. She also reminds me of a finding that we had back in January in our public release, that most people, like 80% of people, 83% of people, I believe, think that they encounter misinformation on a daily basis. That's probably a reasonable figure. I think that I do, certainly. And so when I hear her say that no matter all the hate that comes in, I'm still his biggest fan, that tells me that she's turning off what she's hearing and that there are limits to how much the negative news can break through to her because people simply don't believe what they're hearing. That's likely a good and healthy response, but it is a product of an environment that is just rife with, if not misinformation, just throwing bombs and telling only one side of a story without ever giving any context or telling another side.
Brendan, Trump also told reporters this week that Cuba will be falling pretty soon, or be failing pretty soon, saying that the island's economy is collapsing, and now that Venezuela has stopped spending oil and money. Let's listen.
Well, we're going to see what happens with Cuba. I don't know, anybody interested in Cuba in this room? Not too many people. This is not a Cuba room, but that's all right. There are plenty of them around, especially in Miami. And Cuba will be failing pretty soon. Cuba is really a nation that's very close to failing.
Brendan, can I get your reaction?
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the president is foreshadowing some pressure that he and the administration are going to put on Cuba. Obviously, with the seizure of Maduro in Venezuela and the ability to cut off the oil there, that has put pressure on Cuba and on that regime. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has a personal interest and a longstanding national security interest in reducing the influence of Cuba in the Western Hemisphere. The Cuban people have suffered under the regime for now 60 plus years under communism and socialism. And so I'm really hopeful that we can see some changes there in the country for the Cuban people, because they're a great nation, and I'd love to see this administration help make Cuba great again.
Alex, do you agree? Is Trump potentially foreshadowing something there?
It's possible. I think the Cuban regime has been teetering for a while. if it is a relatively inexpensive endeavor for the United States, then people will basically support it. We saw that people basically supported the actions in Venezuela. People basically supported the actions in Iran a lot more so when it seemed like they had no cost to them. And so if that is what some kind of an action turns out to look like in Cuba, great. People are on board with that. If it's more costly than that, if there is a collapse of a system and people are getting violent and you see unrest, people don't like that. Americans don't like that. It brings back memories of the war on terror and unsuccessful attempts at nation building. I don't particularly see that in the in the cards for Cuba. And so if that's not what happens, then Trump will continue to be the luckiest president of my lifetime. And that doesn't seem terribly unlikely.
Cygnal principal and pollster Alex Tarascio and CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI and political strategist Brendan Steinhauser. Thank you both so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.